Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector, and today what I'm going to do is go through and redo some of these recommended changes to faction videos. What a lot of people have been asking me for is, can I just break these in per faction? Because in the past when I've done these, I've had multiple factions and multiple different unit types within one video. And what I've been requested to do is just spend a little more time specifically going through each faction and maybe being a little more specific with the changes that I'd recommend. And as I've slowly been going through some of the older videos and adding some time codes, which people have frequently been asking for as well, I kind of went back through and rewatched some of my videos going through how I would use these units and kind of going through each different unit in more in depth. And if you're looking for those videos, you know, I definitely have a playlist set up for every faction where I spend about 20 to probably 40 minutes going through every unit in depth, and I show a skirmish mission with them. I show every one of these different weapon loadouts to show you what they can do, show off their abilities, and then I get them up to 100 momentum to show off their empowered ability, because there's really no way for you to know what those empowered abilities do until you get somebody up to 100 momentum, since you can't like hover over and tell you what the empowered ability version is. So if that's something you're interested in, I would definitely kind of point you over towards that direction to look at those videos. And I did, like I said, add time codes for most of the factions as I'm slowly making my way through it to give you an example of how to use each one of those units if you're struggling to put armies together and things like that. I also have a faction versus faction series, so that should help you there. So again, today's video is just going to be me going through the Astra Militarum here and giving my thoughts about recommended changes to the units, just to make them a little more balanced, because there's a few things that definitely don't feel good with the Astra Militarum here. Now, I don't have any particular order to this, and I'll add time codes here just for my thoughts on these units in particular. Now, if you have other thoughts about changes, comment below. Who knows, maybe somebody from Slytherin will by some chance see this video and can see what kind of our thoughts are. I know a lot of people through Discord send them some messages, but I don't really see a lot of changes happening, and even when there's a lot of known bugs. So either those bugs are very complicated, or they're just not taking it into account, or quite frankly they don't care, which is always a possibility too. But given that they seem to be still releasing patches, bug fixes, and then still planning on releasing whole new factions of this game, I would hope that they would maybe make some tweaks on some of these other units here. So the first unit I wanted to talk about today is the Basilisk. It's gone through several changes since this unit was first released, and I think the changes they've made have been very, very good and have been going in the right direction. But over time in this game, there seems to be some power creep that's been going on. And now I feel that the Adeptus Sororitas artillery has been improved so much. I feel like the Basilisk, while originally when it was released, like, nobody would use it, it just wasn't worth it. And then they made these changes, and now it's almost worth it, but it's still not quite there where you can get it to regularly pay for itself, where it'll be a game-changing feature. So it costs the same amount as the Exorcist. The Exorcist gives you the ability to manually select up to 3 targets every several turns, which it'll then launch an attack on. Now, I don't think the Basilisk here has a similar ability, except it's for the barrage, and then this is pure RNG. So if you have 9 units all lined up in a 3x3 square here, and you decide to attack here, well, you have a 100% chance that 3 of those attacks going to randomly hit 3 of these units. Now, I don't think you could convert this to be 1-to-1 with the Exorcist, because the Earthshaker cannon has so much more splash damage than the Exorcist does, that this would just be way too expensive unless they wanted to really jack up the price of the artillery. But I think that would then not be very fun, because this would effectively allow you to almost annihilate 3 high-value targets from your opponent, whether it be light tier, medium tier. The heavy artillery or heavy units would still be able to somewhat tank it, but it just wouldn't feel good. So instead, what I would recommend is the heavy bolter. gets to be a free action, and you know that you could make that every 2 to 3 turns. That way you have both an artillery piece and the heavy bolter attack. You're not going to want to be moving your artillery because you're still going to want to be getting your ingrained precision abilities where you're stacking this up if your guys aren't moving here. So that will work pretty well for you, and that way you don't want to be moving. And then I would recommend that the charge time for Barrage be turned down to 1 turn. Now, this might be too overpowered, so let me know, because it has a cooldown of 2 turns. But my thought is the first turn, or by turn 3, you're probably going to be pretty close to engagement, and at that time you're going to have your opponent most likely to be grouped together to increase the effectiveness of the barrage. And that should allow you to get significant damage onto your opponent and maybe even get some unit kills. And I think if you did these 2 changes here, then you'd make the Basilisk definitely worthwhile for the unit to be used now more regularly. And then you'd have to put the player that's bringing the Basilisk, they'll have to take into consideration, do I want to move them up close enough where that heavy bolter free attack is going to actually be worthwhile, or do I want to put this behind cover where they're not going to be able to counterattack the artillery piece, but then I'm also not going to be able to take advantage of those free actions with the heavy bolter. So I think that could lead to some interesting dynamic play. So that's kind of my thoughts with the minor tweaks to the Basilisks here. Let me know if you guys think that that would be too powerful, but I still don't find that these are quite able to pay for themselves. I suppose alternatively you can maybe just add the free bolter attack, and that by itself may actually be enough of a difference where it would be worthwhile to bring this, where it would increase the chance of it being able to pay for itself and you get more money out of your units here. But again, let me know what your guys' thoughts. But that was kind of my quick napkin math here to make the Basilisk slightly better. Now, the other thing that I think is absolutely abysmal is the Blitz'em ability just sucks. You have to there's a couple ways I think you could do this. Is one, you make it a free action, but that doesn't feel good. And that way you're not taking 2 action points, because you have to take 1 action point from the tank commander and then 1 action point from the vehicle that's going to be the Leman Russ or Rogaldorm that's going to be using the ability. And now you've used 2 action points for 2 very powerful units to get a very mild charge attack, which doesn't feel good. And then giving them just a 10% grazed chance in exchange for using up the action point for your tank commander just doesn't feel good either. So what I would like to see this ability change into is effectively just make it the same as the run 'em over ability is effectively for the tank commander. So that will give him the ability to charge out of dangerous combat and also give him the ability to do a melee attack. Or you just make it the same as the Dozer blade is for the Chimera, where he ends up getting a melee attack where he's just running over and hitting the unit in melee. Or you could just significantly increase the graze chance, so then you're actually using this ability to substantially give some defensive bonuses to one of your other tanks in exchange for that action point, and then therefore you may actually just use it for that defensive ability, and you may not even want to use their action point to do the Blitz'em ability here. So those were kind of my thoughts, but right now how this is, it just doesn't feel good, because you can't, it's not like you can do Blitz'em, give them the pound them to the dust, and then do double melee attack to kill whatever unit is locking you into melee range that's messing up your tanks right now. So it just seems like using those action points just is not worth it in its current state. So I think there needs to be some mild tweaks here, but that's what I would recommend. Otherwise, I feel like the changes to the tank commander overall feel pretty good, and I wouldn't change too much. I think they definitely did a good job by eliminating not being able to bring out the 2 tank commanders at the lower tier matchups, because giving the double pound them to dust, double Rogaldorm build that I used to do was very overpowering and just very overwhelming for players, because effectively you could win the engagement in the first you know, 3-4 turns of the match, assuming you took out their high value units that could counter you. So that became very frustrating for the opponent. So I think that those other changes overall definitely support, but that would be my thoughts with the tank commander. Kind of going along with that Blitzum ability, they ended up breaking the Chimera, so they need to go back and fix the Chimera. So, you know, obviously the standard is just the standard. You get the multi-laser here, and then you get the flamer. You've got a good transport unit here, whatever, fine. But what I would like to see is if you're going to do the Chimera with the Dozer blade, you're losing that heavy flamer and getting the heavy bolter instead. But when they did this, and you also get that run 'em over ability, which is effectively a melee charge, to get into combat, get out of combat, you know, whatever the situation was. But in the past, what would happen is you'd also have that Dozer blade ability. And what that would do is if you were within melee range of your opponent, you would then have the Dozer blade become available on your UI on the screen, and you could select that and actually just ram into the unit that was right next to you. And I would like to see that get restored. That way you have the ability to give these guys a melee attack to help you, and then that you could use that instead of your multi-laser, or I suppose you could turn it into a free action, but I think that's going to be too much coding. So I'd like it to just show back up on your UI and just make it there all the time, and just say it has a range of 1, and then it's only available to be selected if you have an opponent within range 1. But I think that would just be a much better option, and then it would also give you better ways of attacking, because now you're locked this guy into melee most likely, and you can't use your multi-laser very well because you're going to be real close, and then you may or may not want to use that heavy bolter because again it has an optimal range of 4 just like the multi-laser. So then you're kind of getting conflicting options here. Now originally it was supposed to be, you know, you charge through, you unload your Chimera, and then you'll be in a better situation. But I think by restoring that Dozer blade attack, that may actually make this be a better option. The other thought I had is, what would your guys' thoughts be about if you had an infantry unit locked into or loaded into the Chimera that you then get access to a free action, which would be a mild las gun attack. That way it could lead to more viability with a more infantry build, because then you could just put some Cadian shock troops and then you put them inside your your Chimera here, and then that would unload, give them the option to have the additional attacks with these side weapons, because traditionally that's what the options were. And if you play Gladius, which was also made by these developers, that would actually give you access to additional attacks if you had your infantry inside there. So I kind of feel like you should get access to that, because they did even make the design for that being there. I would just like to see a better, build that has more infantry and more dynamic play, and I think that could be interesting in a way to take advantage of the situation, is by also giving them access to that attack. Now, I doubt they're going to want to do that because it's going to be more programming, and I'm not sure they're going to want to make those kind of changes. But at a minimum, I think they need to fix the Dozer blade and bring back that attack, because I think that would help make the melee version, sacrificing that heavy flamer for the ramming attack would make this a viable build, because right now nobody uses this because it's just not worth it with its current options. Sacrificing the heavy flamer for a charge attack every couple of turns just doesn't make sense, especially because the units you would most likely want to charge into combat, i.e. your Ogrins, they added the claustrophobia lore into it, so now the Ogrins are refusing to get into the Chimera, so it's like you don't have anybody else that's really good in melee other than your heroes, and you're not going to want to just suicide your heroes behind enemy lines here, except in very specific situations where there may be like one high value target and you just charge in there and unload and get to snipe out that unit. But again, the chance of that happening is quite low, so bring back the Dozer blade is my thoughts there. Another unit, speaking of the Ogrins, is I don't feel like the Ogrins are in a totally good place right now. And I think there's a couple of ways that they could fix this. They do good range damage, they do pretty decent melee damage, but they're too easy to kill effectively. You know, they only have 4 armor. You know, given that they're wearing cargo pants and no shirt, it doesn't really feel good that they should increase the armor, but that would be a way for them to make this better, but it doesn't feel like that would probably be appropriate. What I think they need to do is just make these guys have a shit ton of health, and then they could even maybe decrease the armor further, and that way these guys really would feel like beefcakes. You know, the knobs and things like that have more health than these guys because they have the 5 models. So I just think you need to increase the amount of HP that these guys have and just really turn them into huge tanks. Alternatively, like I said, you could increase the armor. It would probably be reasonable because these are supposed to be your big, bulky, frontline melee lockdown troops, but right now they can't effectively do that well. So that doesn't seem great as a possible option. You know, you could increase the evasion, but again, that doesn't feel like lore-wise that should be good because you effectively have these mutant giants that are in there, so giving them a bunch of evasion, that seems like it's kind of weird. I suppose what you could do is increase the graze chance of the Ogrins, and that, but right now how this works is, you know, you only have a 10% chance of creating a grazed attack, and they just don't have enough HP for that really to make sense. So either you increase the percentage that their graze attacks are, or you substantially increase the HP per model, where therefore they can start tanking hits and soak up those multiple hits much better. The other thing is the bodyguard ability. I wish it would also work for ranged attacks, kind of like how, I think is it the Necrons, I think, have access to both melee or range attack. One of them that has the similar ability will go off for either, but I wish it would go for that, and I also wish that they would be activated for any HQ unit, so this would go for any of these bodyguard abilities that I get triggered for any HQ unit, not just your HQ commander. So I think that, I guess, in the 15% bonus health is fine, just keeping that the way it is so you can have them tank, but that does take your action point, so I just wish there was a little more dynamic play with that, but the Ogrins just don't feel like they can tank enough hits for you. I get what their thought is. They don't want to make it too beefy, because even when you have one model, then you just convert yourself into the Furious Charge, and that can kill things, but you just need to do something with the Ogrins here because they're just not quite where they want to be, and I'd like to see every unit have some viability. And how they are currently, I rarely see the Bullgryns being used on multiplayer matches because of there's better units to be used. Another unit that I think could use some minor tweaking is the Heavy Weapon Squad. They're just too easy to kill is the problem. So I like that they start out with negative evasion, because, you know, you got these guys running around with these heavy weapons, right? And before they're set up, you know, it makes sense that they should be easy to kill. But I think they probably need to have a minor health increase, because they're just too easy to kill right now. And then what my thought was on this is, while you're using your setup stacks, I would like to see each setup stack give you 5 evasion. So that way it goes up to 6. So at 6 stacks, that will now give you 30 evasion, but you have -10, so that would get these guys up to 20 evasion when they are fully set up. And then you would be converting those setup stacks into helping your other abilities, and they get down to where they were before. I think that's going to probably allow these guys to be more viable and be a more interesting play style. I still don't feel like the autocannon quite works out appropriately. I can definitely see certain situations where the autocannon can be very good, but it's like the las cannon is exceptional at killing high value targets, and then the missile launcher has both the crack and frag abilities, and so that gives these guys abilities to do good damage against either one of those targets, especially once you get all those setups up. So I still don't feel like the autocannon quite works out to make itself a good option, because it's like you're sacrificing some of the splash damage from the missile launchers for the autocannon, or you're sacrificing the exceptional anti-vehicle assassination ability of your las cannon here, so it just doesn't feel quite right with how it is. And then it also feels very strange that the missile launcher actually outranges the las cannon. I would like to see the las cannon have the 9 range and bring the range down from the missiles down to 8, so it would be more equivalent to the autocannon. But it seems weird that this is actually your longest range option. It definitely feels like the las cannon, especially because you're paying extra for it, that should give you that little boost to the range, and that would also allow these guys to kill vehicles, transports, and assassinate enemy HQ units much easier. So I think that's what I'd recommend. I mean, overall, I like the penetrating shot. I like the option of going back and forth between these. They've now fixed the empowered ability for the setup, whereas before that wouldn't work. Now it does. You know, to pour it on, it's the right thought. I mean, you're adding shots, which is how you can make the autocannon start paying for itself. But I don't know if you just need to add 2 shots per 2 stacks. That's probably going to be too high of damage output, but there's just, the autocannon just doesn't quite feel like where it should be. So maybe you guys have thoughts on what should happen to the autocannon. Like I said, it is pretty good against medium targets, but I just don't find that it's in the best situation right now, because I personally never use the autocannon, and I almost never see the opponents use the autocannon. I do occasionally see the las cannons and the missile launchers, but again, with how they are now, it's just such a specific map setup that you need to have these guys on that just most players just bypass it, so it just doesn't feel like they're quite in a good spot right now. But I think if you did that, that might help things. My other just general recommendation is, just like how the Castellan gets access to the plasma pistol, I'd like to see your other 2 HQ units get the option to be able to add the plasma pistol here as well. And then, since I'm talking about the HQ units, what I'd like to see is the Cadian Sergeant to be slightly more expensive, and then you give him 2 action points. That way, when you're doing an infantry-based army, he can then give everybody 10% ranged accuracy and ranged armor to your infantry units. And then if they're attacking you in melee, because you don't really have any good infantry that will be over there to be able to defend yourself, you can then allow him to use the chainsword for 2 attacks per AP, and he can actually do some more damage. But in order to give him the double action points, you need to slightly increase his cost a little bit more. But I think that would be a much better option as well. And then while you're having this guy most likely sitting back buffing your heavy weapon squads, you know, that'll give him option to give you additional evasion to stack on top of your other ones. And then he'll also be getting the evasion because he'll be next to your heavy weapon squad. And I think all those things together, that should synergize in a way to make things more viable. And then if he's also running around helping your Kasrkin squads here, I think that could be a fun way of kind of tweaking things slightly to give him more options. And then giving him the plasma pistol also gives him the ability to actually do some range damage, because right now he can't do shit with that las pistol because it only has 1 armor piercing. But he's actually a pretty decent melee fighter, and it can actually be pretty annoying when you're playing the planetary conquest, because these guys I don't think have any cap to how many you can bring traditionally. I mean, well, I guess you have 6 on a 2,000 point matchup, and even more when it gets higher. So what you'll find is the Astra Militarum AI will just fill their whole roster with a bunch of these sergeants. So you're like, okay, I got to kill all these sergeants because you don't want them running in melee and chopping your guys apart. But that's my thought there. And then speaking of the infantry, what I would like to say is I still don't feel like the Kasrkin are quite in a spot where they should be. I think what you could do if you're going to keep up with the hotshot lasgun option here is make it so the meltamines have a cooldown of 2 turns. That way you can pretty much guarantee that you're most likely going to be deploying both of the mines, because that's really where these guys can do exceptional amounts of damage. I mean, they are good at killing infantry with all the shots, with the armor piercing 3, so they can now actually do some damage, especially if you start stacking them up with your Sergeant's giving you a ranged accuracy on the top of the Kasrkin, giving you additional ranged accuracy, and then you use that, bring it down to lower the evasion and armor of your opponent. These guys can do a lot of damage in those situations, but I think helping them get those 2 melt-a-mines out will be better. And then my thoughts are I actually don't like that it becomes visible after 3 turns. I assume they can't leave it invisible indefinitely because they don't know how to code it, but maybe you increase the invisibility for 5-6 turns. That way it's more likely to be throughout the whole match, and that way if you just deploy these on the strategic command points to help you hold it and forcing your opponent to sacrifice units to run over the mines to take it, I think that would lead to more dynamic play. And I'd actually think if you did that, that would definitely make the Kasrkin pay for themselves. And that would be, I think, kind of a good way to balance these guys out. Now, the upgraded volley gun here still does not quite feel good. I mean, you're giving yourself extra attacks for 20 points, so now these guys are costing 110 points requisition to get them out onto the battle. Now, the overcharged salvo is a very good ability, because you're now giving them an extra armor piercing, so that's bringing them up to 4. You're getting +2 shots, so now you're getting 12 attacks per model for that turn. But their overheated status still is too debilitating, because that lasts for 3 turns. So I think the ways to fix this, I think there'd be potentially a couple of ways. One, you make the overheated status only last 2 turns. Even then, I think that's going to feel kind of bad, but 3 is just too overwhelming, and that really limits your ability to do it. So I would say 2 turns would be option number 1. Option number 2 is you make this ability be like the overcharged ability, where it has a chance to actually deal damage to your soldiers at a certain percentage, and then that would allow them to heal. Well, I guess you don't really have access to a healer, so therefore it wouldn't be too overwhelming in that aspect. And then you would have to decide, do you want to risk the potential damage to your Kasrkin for the additional attacks? And you'd have to balance out, where's the chance I'm going to lose models, kind of like what you have to do with the Tau with the Pathfinders and their ion rifles. I think that would be a better option. And the third option would be is you just decrease the penalty by -20% stacks. You just drop it down to like 10% stacks, and so then your opponent is just going to keep overcharging it until they get killed, and then by the time that 20, they get up there, that's 3 overcharge salvos by the time that they actually start not being able to they start penalizing themselves more than what the benefit they're getting from the overcharged salvo would be. So I think those would be kind of my thoughts. I think, I don't think any of them are great options, but I think what they are now, it just doesn't make sense for you to spend 110 points getting these guys out when you can get an Armored Sentinel here with a plasma cannon for 120 points. They have more movement, more armor, or for 110 points, which is the equivalent, you now have a heavy flamer, which is going to kill way more units. So I think you just need to tweak that situation a little bit here, and I think that would help out quite a bit to bring these Kasrkins out to be better options. I guess since I'm kind of just foreshadowing units here, I do have some minor thoughts about the Armored Sentinel. I think the default option here with Heavy Flame are perfectly fine. What I would like to see with the Armored Sentinel is when you empower the plasma cannon, the empowered description sucks. It just says like annihilate all enemies, but it's still not a one-shot kill. So you need to actually tell your players what the supercharged ability does when it's overpowered. If it's a supercharged ability that's the same as the other factions, then you just need to say that like you do for the Hellblasters and everything else. You can't just say kills everything when it doesn't kill everything. If it's adding splash, adding damage, adding armor piercing, just say specifically what it's doing. So you need to fix your description of the plasma cannon supercharged empowered ability. Minor gripe, so you should easily be able to fix that. So please please do, so players know exactly what they're deciding when they have to decide, are they going to spend their 100 momentum to overcharge the plasma cannon, or do they just want to get 2 attacks with the plasma cannon itself. So please add the description of what exactly you're doing instead of just some nebulous description there. And then the other thing I'd like to have changed is, one thing I think they didn't fix at all when they changed this is the multi-laser from the Sentinel. I think the original option was actually much better. So I think there's a couple ways I can do this. Is one, you select one unit and you apply harassing fire to it, and you either dramatically reduce the movement and accuracy and make that last for 1 turn. So you could do like -30 accuracy, -2 movement for 1 turn. So therefore it actually makes sense for you to sacrifice your attack, because you're effectively not going to do much damage when you're getting, you know, -10 range attacks at -12 damage per shot. You're effectively making it so you're not doing any damage. So I think that would be option number 1. Option number 2 is you make it similar to how it was before, where you have these minor debuffs, but you make it last for 2 turns, and therefore it makes it a better option. Or option number 3 is, instead of making it be adjacent targets, you make it last just for 1 turn, but you can just select up to 3 units that are within a certain radius, kind of like how when you're selecting your attacks for the Exorcist's devastating rain ability, or other abilities where you have to select units within a certain target. I think that'd be a much better option. But by making them have to be directly adjacent to each other, that just doesn't feel good with this ability. And perhaps having them be able to nullify 3 different Overwatch attacks, maybe that's too good, and maybe you just want to make it be against 2 units that you can select within a certain area. But how it is currently, nobody's going to want to spend an additional 15 requisition, sacrifice a heavy flamer or a plasma cannon for a very minor debuff that's going to be very hard to put onto the maximum amount of units, and you're not going to be doing much for damage to them. So I think you need to make some major changes to that unit as well, so it just doesn't feel like it's worth the points here with that where it is currently. So hopefully that would make the Astra Militarum be a much better faction. The only other thought I have is the Psykers. Please fix the multiplayer bug where the empowered psychic maelstrom bugs out. I mean, that can be you've fixed the Psyker. She's now a very good unit. You've done great things to make her better, but by making it so you effectively lose the empowered maelstrom, I mean, in my experience, it bugs out like 50% of the time, and so it's just too high risk. So it's like, if you have that empowered psychic maelstrom, that could potentially be a situation game winning, especially if you're doing like a conquer or fighting over a strategic command point, something like that. So if you're spending the time to deploy that empowered ability, you throw it down, that sacrifices your action point, and then it bugs out, and then you're still empowered the next turn, you've effectively lost your action point, in which case you could have either buffed one of your units or dramatically debuffed one of your opponents. So please fix this bug, because that is just a devastating situation that really ruins the fun of the Primaris Psyker. So fix that psychic maelstrom bug that's occurring here. And then, ideally, if you're going to add units to the roster, please give us some freaking options for some Bullgryns. So we have Ogryn that's super heavily armored, that has a good melee unit. If you wanted to give them the grenade gauntlets where they're sitting there having a grenade attack too, like you did in Sanctus Reach, I mean, that would be amazing. But we definitely need a frontline tank to be able to hold, to make an infantry based army be viable, because currently, without having something in the front line to be able to hold the opponents back, there's just no options for a viable infantry build. And ideally, I doubt this is ever going to happen, because it would require a lot of programming. But I think what most players were really hoping with the Astra Militarum is, just like how you gave a ton of variability with the spawn sim builds. I think most players were expecting a multi loadout weapon, so it'd be like basic weapons. You have a melee loadout. You give them grenade launchers. You give them plasma weapons. You give them melta guns. You know, something that no matter what, you have all these units that have some lower tier units, but you can just do like some swarms, and different ones have different options, or flamers. You know, I think that's what most people were expecting. And then you would definitely have a lot of different play styles, and you would actually could create some infantry swarms that could do some good damage, because then you'd have, you know, the plasma to deal the medium tier units and armored units, but could also do some damage to the heavies. You'd have the flamers that would be able to take out the low tier infantry and also act as a screen against the melee units coming at you. You could have maybe the grenades act, but I suppose the grenade launchers are not really necessary since you have the frag grenades here, because that would be kind of redundant. And then obviously the melta would help them attack the most heavily armored units. So ideally, that's what I would like to see. So then you'd have a true infantry build. But like I said, I doubt that's ever going to happen. But that would be absolutely amazing if that ever occurred, because then you would have I think you'd have a lot of interest into the Astra Militarum. But those are my recommended changes for this faction here. I think the command point abilities work fine the way they are. You know, the other thing that would be nice about a mass infantry swarm is, you know, you get a bunch of those Cadian shock troops killed. All of a sudden you got 3 command points, and you could just do that death strike missile barrage at 3 command points and wipe out the unit. So it would be a fun situation. So I think if you made some of these minor tweaks, that would make this a much better faction. So that's my 2 cents. If you guys have other thoughts, please share them. I'd be very interested to see what you guys have to say. But I think if they did these things, this would make it a much better faction. So with that, I'm going to sign off for the day. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please give my channel a like and subscribe. Encouraging to post more content for you. Have a great day.